The street city was alive with sound. Car horns echoed in the distance. Footsteps hurried across the sidewalks and voices rose and fell like waves. Streetlights were beginning to glow, turning the road into a stage of shadows and yellow light. People carried bags, briefcases, and stories of their own, rushing to reach home before night took over. Among the crowd walked a tall black man in a clean dark suit. His shoes shone, and his leather briefcase swung softly at his side. His walk was steady, calm, almost graceful, as if no noise in the world could disturb his rhythm. His name was Charles. Though few knew the full weight behind it, Charles paused at the corner of the street, waiting for the light to change. He looked around with a quiet smile, noticing small details others often ignored. A mother held her daughter's hand tightly, guiding her across the busy road. A street vendor shouted, trying to sell roasted peanuts. Two teenagers laughed loudly, sharing jokes only they understood. Life was ordinary, simple, alive. But in the middle of this flow, danger was waiting. From behind, the screech of tires ripped through the air. A police car swerved sharply, stopping only a few feet away. Its red and blue lights spun across the buildings, painting the evening in sharp, flashing colors. The sound was so sudden that people froze where they stood. A silence spread like a ripple across the street. The driver's door swung open with force. A police officer stepped out, his hand already on his weapon. His eyes narrowed the moment they fell on Charles. His voice boomed, rough and commanding. "You! Hands up! Get on your knees now!" Heads turned. Gasps cut through the air. Shoppers stopped walking. The vendor's voice died mid-sentence. Even the children went silent, their eyes wide. The city, alive only seconds before, felt frozen under the weight of the officer's words. Charles turned slowly, his expression calm, but his heart racing inside his chest. The officer's hand was gripping his gun tightly, and the muzzle was already aimed in his direction. "Officer," Charles began carefully, his voice low but steady. "I think there's been some mistake." "Down," the officer barked, stepping closer, his boots heavy against the pavement. "On your knees." The demand cut sharp through the air. People nearby whispered nervously, some raising their phones to record. A woman covered her mouth with her hands. A man shook his head in disbelief. Charles felt the eyes of everyone on him. He glanced at the briefcase still in his hand, slowly, so there could be no misunderstanding. He bent down and placed it on the ground. The sound of leather against concrete was small, but in the tense silence, it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, with calm movements, he lowered himself onto his knees. The rough pavement dug into his trousers. He looked up at the officer, his face lit by the spinning lights, but his eyes remained steady. "Please," he said softly. "There's no need for this." The officer's jaw tightened. His finger hovered close to the trigger, and his voice carried the weight of anger, fear, and suspicion. "Stay where you are. One wrong move, and you'll regret it." Charles did not flinch. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself, then exhaled slowly, letting his calmness fill the air around him. Inside, he felt the deep ache of humiliation, too. Kneel in the middle of the street, with strangers watching, was not a moment he would ever forget. But he knew raising his voice or showing anger would only make things worse dot around them. The scene had become like a painting. The mother hugged her child closer. The vendor put his tray aside. The teenagers no longer laughed. Their phones were raised high, recording the moment. A cold wind brushed through the street, but nobody moved. Charles's dark suit looked almost too neat for the dirty pavement. His tall frame, now kneeling, seemed too dignified for the humiliation of the position. Yet he stayed still, his back straight, his face calm. The officer, breathing heavily, kept his gun aimed, his own nerves visible in the way his hands shook. The light above flickered. The sound of the siren filled the air, and the whole street held its breath. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt like minutes. Charles finally spoke again, his voice quiet but strong. "I am not a threat." The words carried far beyond his own mouth. They echoed in the hearts of the people watching. A simple sentence, but heavy with meaning. And yet, the gun did not lower in that moment. The street itself seemed divided. On one side, fear and suspicion. On the other, dignity and calm. Two men stood locked in a silent battle, one with power drawn in steel, the other with strength rooted in silence. The city lights glimmered above. A bus rumbled in the distance, unaware of the drama unfolding on this single block. And there, on the hard pavement of the street, a kneeling man waited. A man no one yet realized was far more than he appeared. The accusation street was frozen in silence. Red and blue lights flashed across glass windows, painting every face with sharp colors. Charles stayed on his knees, calm but heavy with unease, his dark suit pressed against the rough pavement. While the officer's guns stayed locked on him, the officer's voice rose again, louder this time, echoing off the buildings. "You think I don't see what's going on here? Don't play games with me. Empty your pockets. Now." Gasps spread through the crowd. A man standing near the corner muttered, "He's not doing anything wrong," but his words faded quickly. Under the weight of the officer's command, Charles lifted his hands higher, fingers spread wide to show he carried nothing. His voice was steady, careful, every word chosen like it carried the weight of survival. "My pockets hold nothing dangerous. Please, officer, I am cooperating." But the officer didn't soften. His face was hard, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. With suspicion, he stepped closer, his boots striking the pavement like thunder. His gun was now only a few feet away from Charles's chest. "You fit the description," the officer growled. "Tall, black, suit. Don't think I can't see through your act. Where were you coming from? Who are you hiding from?" Charles closed his eyes for the briefest moment, gathering strength. Inside, he felt the sting of injustice. He had spent his life upholding the law, protecting fairness, believing in justice, and here he was, treated as though he were the enemy. "I was walking home," Charles said quietly. "I work nearby. I am not the man you are looking for." But the officer didn't listen. He circled him like a predator around its prey. The crowd's eyes followed his every move. Phones stayed raised, recording every second, their small red lights glowing like silent witnesses. "Liar," the officer hissed. "Men like you think you're clever, think you can fool the system, but not tonight." The words cut deep. Charles felt a wave of pain, not from the officer's tone alone, but from the weight of history behind it. Kneeling in the middle of the street, he carried not just his own dignity, but the dignity of countless men who had been humiliated before him. The tension thickened. A teenager near the crowd shouted, "He didn't do anything." His voice cracked, filled with fear. Immediately, his mother pulled him back, whispering fiercely, "Stay quiet." The officer's hand trembled slightly on the gun, his anger mixed with fear, and that fear made him dangerous. The street seemed smaller now, boxed in by flashing lights and heavy silence. Charles inhaled slowly, his back straight, his hands high. His voice, though quiet, carried with a strange power. "Officer, I have nothing to hide. Please, check my briefcase. Check my pockets. I am not your suspect." The officer snarled, but doubt flickered across his face. His eyes darted to the briefcase lying beside Charles. He hesitated, as though debating whether to kick it open or force Charles to do it. The crowd grew restless. Murmurs filled the air. Some people whispered prayers, others shook their heads. In shame, one woman held her phone close to her chest, whispering, "Please let this end without blood." The officer leaned in closer, his shadow falling over Charles. "What's your name?" he demanded. Charles looked up, his calm eyes locking with the officer's sharp ones. "My name is Charles." "Charles what?" Charles's lips parted. He could have spoken his full name then and ended it all, but he didn't. Not yet. Something inside him told him to wait, to let this scene play out, to let the truth reveal itself at the right moment. He wanted the officer and the crowd to see not just his title, but the mistake being made before them. So he answered simply, "Charles." "That is all you need for now." The officer's face twisted with anger at the calmness of the reply. His voice cracked like a whip. "Don't get smart with me. Tell me your last name. Who do you think you are?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke. The people watching leaned forward, hearts racing, waiting for what would come next. Charles held his head high, his knees still pressed against the hard pavement. His dignity shone brighter than the flashing red and blue lights. His voice came again, low but firm. "I am a man. That should be enough." The words rolled through the street like thunder. Some in the crowd whispered yes, others nodded, tears glistening in their eyes. For a moment, the fear broke, replaced by something stronger. Truth. But the officer, blinded by his anger, did not hear it. His finger twitched dangerously near the trigger. His voice dropped lower, filled with threat. "One more word like that, and I'll—" The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, but heavy with danger. The city held its breath. The kneeling man stayed still, a picture of quiet strength. The officer loomed above, his weapon gleaming, and the crowd, powerless yet awake, waited for the storm to break. The night was only beginning. The breaking point there was thick with silence, heavy and sharp, like a blade waiting to fall. The flashing police lights bathed every face in red, then blue, then red again. The city that had been alive with noise was now frozen, caught in the grip of fear. Charles stayed kneeling, his hands lifted high, his back straight against the humiliation of the moment. The officer loomed above him, gun steady, sweat dripping down his brow, his jaw clenched tighter with every second that passed. "Don't test me," the officer growled. His voice cracked with the mix of fear and rage. "One wrong move, and this ends badly." The words cut through the air like lightning. A woman in the crowd gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. A man whispered, "This can't be happening." Children clung to their parents, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the danger. Charles kept calm, though inside his chest, his heart beat like a drum. His voice was measured, slow, carrying dignity even in the dirt of the street. "I'm not your enemy, officer. I have nothing to hide. Please, lower your weapon." But the gun didn't lower. Instead, the officer stepped closer, his shadow falling across Charles like a storm cloud. He barked again, louder this time. "Empty your pockets." "Do it now." Charles slowly reached toward his jacket, every move deliberate, his eyes locked on the officer's face. He knew one sudden motion could be the excuse the officer was waiting for. He pulled out nothing but a small leather wallet, placing it gently on the ground. The wallet landed with a soft thud, innocent and harmless. The crowd murmured. Some people whispered, "He's unarmed. Why is the gun still up?" Others shook their heads in disbelief. The unease was growing, spreading like fire through dry grass. The officer glanced at the wallet, but did not move. His gun never wavered. His voice rose with accusation. "Don't think this proves anything. Men like you always find ways to hide the truth." The insult struck harder than the cold pavement beneath Charles's knees, yet he did not lash out. He lifted his chin, his eyes calm but steady, and answered with quiet strength. "The truth does not need hiding. It waits, even when people refuse to see it." The words made the crowd stir. A teenager shouted, "He hasn't done anything." Another voice, older and firmer, echoed, "Let the man stand up." For the first time, the officer's eyes flickered toward the crowd. He saw dozens of phones raised high, their cameras capturing every detail. Their screens glowed like small flames, unblinking witnesses to the unfolding scene. "Back off." The officer snapped at them, his voice cracking. "All of you back off." But nobody moved. Instead, they pressed closer to the edge of the sidewalk, careful not to cross the invisible line of danger. Their whispers grew louder, their frustration bubbling into anger. Charles felt their eyes on him. He knew they were no longer watching only a man. They were watching a test of dignity against power. He lowered his hand slightly, his voice reaching the officer, but also carrying to the crowd. "You see me kneeling here. I'd have offered no threat. Yet still, the gun points at me. What does that say about justice?" The question hung heavy in the air. The officer's face twisted, his grip tightening. He opened his mouth to reply, but his voice stumbled before the weight of the words. The crowd grew bolder. A man in a work uniform shouted, "He's right. This isn't justice." A woman raised her phone higher, tears on her cheeks. "We're all seeing this. We won't forget it." The officer's rage boiled. He turned back to Charles, shouting, "Quiet. You don't get to speak." His voice cracked with desperation, his authority crumbling under the eyes of witnesses. Charles, still kneeling, did not flinch. His voice came again, steady as stone. "Silence is not justice. Truth must be spoken." The words struck the crowd like a bell. Murmurs turned to louder voices. Some chanted softly, "Let him go. Let him go." Their voices grew, rising like waves, echoing off the building's. The officer's gun trembled. His breathing quickened. He was no longer just fighting one man on the ground. He was fighting the truth, spilling from the mouths of dozens of witnesses. The breaking point was near. One child, small and frightened, cried out to her mother, "Why is he hurting that man?" The mother, holding her tight, answered softly but firmly, "Because he does not know who that man really is." Charles heard it. His heart ached at the innocence of the words. He knew the time to reveal himself was close, but still, he waited. The officer had to see his mistake not just through a name, but through the truth of his own actions. The tension reached its peak. The crowd's voices grew louder, the officer's hand shook harder, and the night air seemed ready to shatter. And through it all, Charles knelt in silence, dignity radiating from him like light against the darkness. The storm was building. The moment of truth was coming. The revealed crowd's voices swelled, a wave of sound pushing against the silence that the officer tried to control. Red and blue lights still washed over the street, but now they felt less like protection and more like a warning. Phones stayed raised, their tiny lenses capturing history in the making. Charles remained kneeling, his tall frame bent, but unbroken. His suit was pressed into the rough concrete, his palms open toward the sky, though his body carried the marks of humiliation. His spirit stood tall. Every breath he took was measured, every word chosen with care. The officer's face glistened with sweat. His gun trembled slightly in his hand. The crowd's chants, let him go, grew louder, cutting into his authority. He barked out, silence, everyone back off, or you'll regret it. But no one moved. No one stopped filming. Charles finally lifted his head, his calm eyes fixed on the officer. His voice was soft, but carried across the street, steady and unshaken. Officer, your fear blinds you. I'd have given you no threat, yet still you aim at me. Look closer, and you will see who I truly am. The officer sneered, trying to cover his shaking hands with a show of authority. And who exactly do you think you are? Some big shot? Some liar in a fancy suit? Charles reached slowly for the briefcase lying on the ground beside him. Every movement was deliberate, his eyes never leaving the officer's. The crowd gasped as his hand touched the handle. The officer's gun twitched higher, finger tense on the trigger. Don't move, the officer roared. His voice cracked with panic. Step away from the bag. But Charles didn't stop. With calm hands, he unlatched the briefcase and opened it. Inside, papers sat neatly stacked. At the very top was a leather folder embossed with a golden seal. The light from the street lamp glinted on it, sharp and undeniable. Charles lifted it slowly, holding it high for all to see. His voice carried a weight that no one could ignore. This is my identification. I am Judge Charles Hammond, sworn to uphold the Constitution of this nation. The crowd erupted in gasps. Murmurs rippled like wind through trees. A judge, someone whispered. He's a federal judge. Another cried out. Phones zoomed in on the folder, catching the seal. That proved the truth. The officer's face drained of color. His jaw slackened. His gun wavered. For the first time, doubt cracked through his mask of anger. His voice faltered. That can't be true. Charles's eyes did not blink. His voice rose with strength, though it was still calm and clear. It is true. I serve in the federal courts. I have given my life to justice. And yet here I kneel, accused, threatened, treated as less than a man because of the color of my skin. The words struck like thunder. The crowd's anger shifted into outrage, their voices rising higher. He's a judge, they shouted. Put the gun down. The officer stumbled back a step, confusion fighting with pride. His weapon still pointed forward, but his arm shook badly now. His authority was slipping through his fingers like sand. Charles stood slowly from the ground. The moment was breathtaking, his tall figure rising from his knees, dust clinging to his suit, dignity shining in his posture. He held the folder high, the golden seal catching the flashing lights. The crowd cheered, clapping and shouting. A woman's voice rang above the noise. Stand tall, Judge. Others joined in, their chants echoing against the buildings. But the officer, humiliated and trembling, shouted over them, Stay where you are. I don't care who you say you are. Don't take another step. Charles looked at him, his face calm but filled with quiet strength. You care, officer, because deep down you know this was wrong. Every eye here sees it. Every camera records it. You cannot erase what has been done. The officer's lips quivered, his eyes darting to the crowd, then back to Charles. The truth pressed in on him from every angle, suffocating him. His gun wavered lower, then rose again, as if he could not decide between surrender and violence. The crowd shouted louder, Put it down, put it down. Their voices thundered like drums, powerful and unyielding. Charles stepped forward, slow and unthreatening, his voice carrying above the storm. Justice is not found in a trembling gun. It is found in courage, in truth, in knowing when to admit wrong. Tonight, officer, the choice is yours. The street seemed to pause. The sirens wailed softly in the background. The city lights glimmered above, and two men stood locked in a final moment, one drowning in fear, the other rising in truth. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the breaking point. The air itself felt like it would shatter, and Charles, holding the seal of justice in his hands, did not flinch. The night was no longer about accusation. It was about truth, and the world was watching. The collapse of night pressed heavy on the street, yet the air felt alive, charged like a storm about to break. Red and blue lights still flashed, but now their glow no longer belonged to the officer, they belonged to the truth unfolding before. Old Charles stood tall now, no longer kneeling, his shoulders squared, his folder raised high. The golden seal glinted under the streetlight, a symbol that could not be denied. The crowd's voices swelled behind him, stronger than before. They chanted, cried, and shouted, each word beating against the officer like a hammer against brittle glass. Put it down, they roared. He's a judge. The officer's face twisted. Pride and fear fought across his features, pulling him into directions. His arms shook as the gun pointed forward, the barrel no longer steady, but trembling. His authority, once sharp and loud, was cracking under the weight of the truth. You think that badge makes you untouchable? He barked, though his voice was thinner now, weaker. You think this changes anything? Charles lowered the folder slowly, pressing it against his chest. His deep voice cut through the officer's trembling words. This changes everything, because you showed the world what you see when you look at me. Not a man, not a citizen, not a judge, just a shadow you feared. The words pierced the air. The crowd erupted in cheers and gasps, their voices carrying his truth forward. The officer staggered back half a step, his chest heaving. His gun wavered, pointing now at nothing and everything at once. The shouts from the crowd grew louder, pushing him further into the corner of his own fear. Enough, he shouted. All of you, quiet. His voice cracked. No one obeyed. The tide had turned. Charles took another step forward, slow, deliberate, unthreatening but strong. His eyes never left the officers. You are not facing a criminal, officer. You are facing a federal judge of this nation, and yet, tonight, you revealed more about yourself than you ever wanted the world to see. Phones in the crowd zoomed closer, capturing every trembling second, every flicker of the officer's fear. The officer's hands shook so badly now that the gun barrel dipped toward the ground. His breath came quick and shallow. The crowd saw. If they smelled the collapse of his power, a chant began softly, then spread like fire. Justice, justice, justice. Their voices pounded against the walls of the buildings, bouncing into the night sky. The officer turned, his eyes darting from face to face, surrounded by witnesses who no longer feared him. One woman, her voice filled with anger, shouted, "You aimed at a judge. You aimed at an innocent man." Another man yelled, "We saw everything. The truth is recorded." The officer's knees bent slightly as if the weight of his own actions pressed down on him. His gun lowered further, until at last it hung limply at his side. His arm dropped, defeated. The crowd roared. Cheers, shouts, and cries filled the street. For the first time, the sound was louder than the siren, louder than fear. Charles stood firmly, his voice rising over the chaos. Tonight proves something greater than me, greater than this officer, greater than this one street. Tonight shows how fragile justice becomes when fear rules the heart. But it also shows that truth will always rise, even when pressed to the ground, even when forced to kneel. Truth will stand tall again. The crowd cheered wildly. Some clapped, others raised their fists high, and many had tears streaming down their faces. A man whispered to his daughter, "Remember this night. Remember his courage." The officer stumbled backward, his face pale, his authority shattered. His gun hung useless at his side, no longer a weapon, only a symbol of his broken control. His lips moved as though he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The world had turned against him. Charles looked at him one last time, his voice calm, but powerful. "You thought power was in your weapon, but real power, officer, isn't restraint. Real power isn't justice, and tonight, you lost both." The officer's eyes dropped to the pavement, shame swallowing him whole. He took another shaky step back, his figure shrinking under the weight of the moment. The crowd surged forward, not with violence, but with unity. They moved closer to Charles, surrounding him in a circle of protection. He stood among them, tall, dignified, his presence shining brighter than the flashing lights. The chant rose again, louder than before. Justice, justice, justice. Above them, the night sky stretched wide, the stars hidden by the glow of the city. But the feeling was clear something historic had happened on this street. Charles held the folder close to his chest, his voice soft now, but still reaching every ear. This night will be remembered, not because I am a judge, but because I am a man, and I stood when I was told to kneel, and because all of you refused to be silent. The crowd erupted in applause, people hugged, cried, and shouted. In the chaos, there was no violence, only unity, only strength, only the taste of something greater than fear. The officer, broken and small, turned his eyes away, lost in his collapse, but Charles stood tall, surrounded by people who had seen the truth, and the night carried their voices high into the city sky. The collapse was complete, and the world had witnessed it. The aftermath storm of voices rolled down the street like thunder. The chants of justice, 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 shook the night, drowning out the sirens still wailing faintly in the background. The flashing red and blue lights no longer symbolized fear, they now lit up the triumph of truth. Charles stood at the center of it all, tall and calm, the folder pressed to his chest. His suit bore the dust of the pavement. His knees ached from the ground he had been forced onto, but his spirit stood unbroken. Round him, people pressed closer, their phones still recording, their voices rising higher. The officer stood apart, shoulders hunched, his gun now hanging useless at his side. His face was pale, his eyes downcast, sweat dripping along his cheek. His authority had collapsed like a wall of sand under a rushing tide. Every second that passed, the crowd's judgment pressed heavier on him. Charles raised one hand, and slowly, like waves calming after a storm, the chants grew softer. The crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on him, their breaths waiting for his words. The silence felt heavy, but this time it was filled not with fear, but with respect. His voice came low, at first, but steady, each word striking the night with clarity. I knelt on this street tonight, not because I was guilty, but because I was judged by the color of my skin. Many of you watched in fear. Many of you recorded in silence. And yet all of us together witnessed the truth, how quickly power can turn against the innocent. Murmurs ran through the crowd, their heads nodding, their eyes shining with tears. Charles continued, his tone rising like a tide. But hear me now. This is bigger than me. I stand before you as a man. Yes, but I am also a judge of the federal court. I swore to uphold justice, to defend fairness, to protect the rights of every citizen, and tonight, I was treated as though none of that mattered. The crowd gasped. At the reminder, the golden seal still glinting faintly in his hand. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then pressed on. This is not the story of one officer and one man. This is the story of a nation where dignity can be stolen in a heartbeat, where a gun can silence truth before it is spoken. But it is also the story of courage. Your courage. You did not turn away. You did not let silence win. You raised your voices, and that is why the truth was revealed. A cheer rose again, this time not angry, but proud, hopeful. Tears streaked down the faces of strangers. Parents held their children closer, whispering for them to remember this night. Charles stepped closer to the officer, his tall frame casting a long shadow under the streetlight. The officer lifted his eyes for a moment, shame heavy in them, but quickly looked away. You aimed a gun at me, Charles said quietly, but his voice carried, not knowing who I was. But even if I were not a judge, even if I were simply a man walking home, would that have justified your fear? Would that have justified this humiliation? The officer swallowed hard, his lips trembling, but no words came. His silence was an answer in itself. Charles turned back to the crowd. Justice is not a title. It is not found in robes or courts or even golden seals. Justice begins in how we see one another, whether we look with fear or with dignity, whether we aim a gun or extend a hand. The people erupted in applause, louder than before. Their voices rose together, no longer chanting in anger, but celebrating unity. One young man near the front shouted, "We'll remember this, Judge." Another cried out, "You gave us hope tonight." Charles nodded, his eyes glistening. He pressed the folder against his chest and raised his other hand toward the sky. "I will take this night into the courtroom. I will take it into the halls of power, and I promise you your voices will be heard. Justice will not kneel. Not here. Not tonight. Not ever." The crowd roared, their cheers echoing down the street, rolling through the city like a wave of hope. People hugged one another, strangers holding strangers, united by what they had seen. The officer, defeated and silent, stepped back into his cruiser, his weapon no longer in his hand. He shut the door, his head low, and the flashing lights dimmed. As the car pulled away, the street exhaled, the tension lifting at last. Charles stood surrounded by the people, no longer alone. Some reached out to touch his shoulder, others shook his hand, many simply whispered, "Thank you." Above them, the night sky stretched wide, stars faint behind the glow of the city. For the first time that evening, the air felt lighter, filled, not with fear, but with hope. Charles looked around, his voice soft now, almost like a prayer. "Let tonight remind us all dignity cannot be taken, justice cannot be silenced, and truth will always rise." The crowd erupted once more, their cheers soaring into the night sky. The moment had ended, but its echoes would live far beyond. This street carried in the hearts of all who had witnessed it, and there, under the glow of the streetlights, Judge Charles Hammond walked forward not as a man who had been forced to kneel, but as a symbol of dignity that would never bow again.